Welcome to the information session for the new alumni sequence in the basic program called Asian Classical Traditions. In just a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Stephen Walker, who was the lead of the curriculum subcommittee who developed the curriculum for Asian Classical Traditions. We're going to go through, we have this, it's only a 5 or 6 slide show. After Stephen talks for 8 to 10 minutes about the new sequence. Then we're going to open things up to a Q&A and drive the rest of our time together by your questions. Without further ado, and let me also say that we are joined by another member of the Asian Classical Traditions subcommittee, Claire Pearson. And so Claire will also be fielding questions here in just a moment. But right now, I'm going to turn things over to Stephen. Stephen?
Hey, everybody. How's it going? As Kendall indicated, this is going to be mainly a discussion driven by you, driven by your curiosity, your worries, your hopes and fears, and so on. My job is simply at the outset to explain roughly what is going on, what is the nature of this alumni sequence, what to expect, and so on. I'm going to give an overview of the curriculum, some of the rationale for the curriculum, and we can go in depth as you wish over the 50 or so minutes ensuing after my opening monologue. So in terms of the broader setting in which Asian classical traditions are going to be taught in the basic program, I can say this with some confidence. All over American academia, North American academia, demand far outstrips supply in this particular area. There are all kinds of systemic factors that prevent Asian classical traditions from being taught from the undergrad through the grad to continuing at any level of our educational system, which means that when you participate in our new alumni sequence, you're basically at the cutting edge of the diversification of humanities in our academic culture. There has been student interest in this for many years. I mean, as a specialist in Asian texts myself, I've been hearing about it since I started teaching in the basic program 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm really proud of the efforts we've all been able to make together to begin bringing this to fruition, finally. So I'm going to be talking through these slides one by one that Kendall has helpfully provided us with his screen share. This sequence, and it is an alumni sequence. Some of you may have questions about the Asian classics, 4-year thing that happened back in the aughts in the early 10s. This draws a certain amount of inspiration and some material from that, but it's a comprehensively different approach because it's integrated as part of the basic program. The instructors are basic program instructors. The pedagogy and the culture is stuff that you're essentially familiar with already. It's going to be just like the modern sequence, the American tradition, the Romans. It's organically been connected to our whole approach. So this sequence, this 2-year alumni sequence, introduces basic program students to the literary cultures of Asia. And Asia is a very, very big place, obviously. We'll get into that. Using carefully selected English translations of texts from what you might think of roughly as Indian or South Asian, Middle Eastern or Islamic world, East Asian traditions. We can also helpfully break them down just into the languages from which these texts have been translated. So we've got Sanskrit and Pali covering pre-Islamic South Asia. We've got Persian and Arabic covering a huge amount of the civilized world, including generous portions of Africa and Europe. More on that to follow. And of course, China, Japan, etc., nailing down the eastern quadrant of the continent. Asian, scare quotes very much recommended, is a term of convenience. In theory, a roster of Asian traditions would actually be much, much longer than this and would include Christianity, for instance. Jesus was from Asia. This roster of traditions is far from exhaustive and roughly captures what the word Asian has meant in American academia historically. That is to say, things welling up from the geographical regions we now think of as India, China, and the Middle East. Intriguingly exclusive of whichever ones made it into the European mainstream, questions and further inquiries abound here. Anyway, Asian is a term of convenience, far from exhaustive, and their historical impact has already shaped you, whether or not you understand it, no matter who you are. Every tradition that human beings have developed and spread is a human tradition, and the impacts go in all directions. Sometimes in the planning of this sequence, we encountered a certain amount of awkwardness calling it Asian classical traditions because some of our key thinkers are European and African. Um, in any case, wherever they come from and whatever the label means, whatever language we're going to be using translations from, we're going to approach these non-Western literary classics as literary classics, using essentially the same spirit and the same methods as you all are used to. So there's going to be an emphasis on engaging with the text in an immediate and intimate way, and in a thoughtful way, connecting it with your own experiences and with contemporary contexts. There's going to be emphasis on the Socratic tradition of question and answer. And there's going to be emphasis on seeing a variety of texts that may seem disconnected or hard to relate to each other at first, but that when seen from a certain angle turn out to have a great deal to do with each other. As the next slide will show us, and that's my cue. There we go, yes. As the next slide will explain, this is a sequence intended for alumni of the 4-year basic program. Asian classical traditions will further develop students' skills at approaching, thinking through, and making use of challenging and sophisticated works. The introduction of several new classical traditions into the mix means that instructors will spend more time on historical and contextual background than you may be used to. So, as many of you probably know, it's a basic premise of basic program pedagogy to emphasize engagement with the text and to de-emphasize, to some extent, arguably sideline, contextual historical explanation. That will be less true of the sequence than it is elsewhere, for the obvious reason that a lot of you will need a certain amount of basic introduction to the times and places and languages in question. Nonetheless, that being said, the focus will remain where it always has been, on lively engagement with the texts. Beyond classical works of narrative and poetry, the sequence will also feature a range of what you might call religious and philosophical and historiographical materials. One productive tension that you may notice in the 2 paragraphs that we've looked at so far is that the first paragraph emphasizes the source language, Sanskrit, Pali, Persian, Arabic, and so on. In this paragraph, we have conventionally religious, or to a certain extent, ethnic labels like Hindu, Buddhist, Confucian, and so on. That's going to be a productive tension because you can emphasize either the tradition in which somebody is participating by virtue of the language they're using in the texts they're drawing on, or you can emphasize the tradition they're participating in at the level of ideology or loyalty. Hence, I almost want you to form a grid in your head where like one axis is the language of the source material and the other axis is this conventional lineup of sort of religious or ethnic labels like Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, and so on. And we're going to be approaching these very much in their own terms, but also as products of their respective literary cultures, to all of which you will get at least a bare bones introduction. On the next slide, we're going to look at a very, I misunderstood. There we go. Yes, next slide. Here are the 3 sections that we are planning. Take a look at that, maybe copy paste the information, maybe transcribe it. These are the options at present. As you can see, one of them is going to be in person and one of them is going to be in the evening. And these are not the same. It's an interesting sort of melange of delivery options. And in the next slide, we get an overview of the year 1 curriculum. I'm going to take 5 seconds to just let you see this. I'm going to take 10 seconds for you to just graze your eyes over this, form certain questions. And then I'm going to let you do the same in the next slide, where the same is done for the 2nd year. Right? It's awesome. It's so fascinating. Why not? What we're going to do over the next slide and following is to look a bit more closely in finer grain at the quarters one by one. The Rig Veda, the oldest scripture of, yes, the oldest scripture of any living religious tradition. The Upanishads, the fathomless metaphysical guitar solos exploring the philosophical implications of the oldest scripture of the world, of a living tradition that is still, breathing in the world and has a following. The Bhagavad Gita, the most famous text of Hindu thought, for better, worse, and otherwise, which tends to be how this goes with great classics. And of course, the Mahabharata, world renowned as the longest written epic in existence, and a story that gives and gives and gives and gives. If I had to, well, I'm not even going to try to explain what the Mahabharata is like. It may come up in the Q&A. The next slide takes us out of that basically Sanskritic and Hindu context and puts us in two new contexts for comparison and contrast. In the seminar, we're going to be looking at what you might call early Buddhism, or maybe basic Buddhism, Pali Buddhism, Pali not being Sanskrit, but being equally Indian. We're going to be looking at, there is also some Sanskrit material here, but the point is there's an early Buddhist alternative to Hindu priorities and Hindu concepts that has been equally vibrant over the centuries and over the continents. You're going to look at it through a biography of the founder, through philosophical reflections about identity and causation, and through the Dhammapada, which is, how do I explain what the Dhammapada is? I'm going to call it the Analects of the Buddha, but that won't necessarily make sense to you unless you know what the Analects of Confucius are, and that's a second-year thing. So all I'm going to say for now is early Buddhism is amazing, fascinating, thrilling, challenging, disturbing. Alongside the seminar, we're going to be looking at more epic. So, previous slide. If we hadn't gotten our fill of epic narrative with the Mahabharata, we may well get it with the other great Indian epic, the Ramayana, and with a text called the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, which is sometimes characterized as the national epic of Persia, or like the national epic of the Iranian people. Figuring out where the concept Persian begins and the concept Iranian ends will be an exercise in and of itself. A particularly interesting thing about the Shahnameh is that it's written around what we would call 1000 AD. It's written in a culture that is Islamic, because Iran certainly was an Islamic culture by 1000 AD. But it was also a culture that was acutely, vivaciously aware of having its own independent pre-Islamic history stretching back thousands of years. The Shahnameh somehow manages to express both of these points of view at the same time. And I'm currently reading it in preparation for teaching it, and there's a lot to talk about. The next slide brings us into the spring of the first year. Figuring out how to approach Islam without simply piling book after book after book after book to get the basics is quite a bit of a challenge. I'm very proud of the decision to place our bets on al-Shafi'i's Epistle on Legal Theory as a text that can very efficiently introduce students to the Quran, the Hadith, and to essential practical contexts for translating that scriptural and sort of anecdotal evidence into actionable ways of living. This, as far as I understand, as a non-specialist, is the fundamental and universally deferred to theoretical treatise on how to reason in the context of Islamic law. So Ibn Tufayl, who follows al-Shafi'i, wrote a beloved allegorical philosophical novel that has often been talked about as like a sort of anticipation of Robinson Crusoe, or like the Robinson Crusoe of the classical Islamic world, where Robinson Crusoe becomes a philosopher based entirely on the evidence of his senses in nature. This has been a very influential text in the development of European philosophy, whether or not people in the European tradition know that. We're also going to be reading Nizami and Attar, some of the pinnacle Persian poets of all time. Apart from their enormous merits as narrative and poetry, there's a very strong religious and mystical dimension to what's going on in those texts. Alongside that seminar, we're going to be looking at this mastermind from North Africa, I believe 14th century, who wrote in Arabic, named Ibn Khaldun. And one thing I'd particularly like to say about the Ibn Khaldun quarter is that the thing about these great classical traditions is that they're not just objects of inquiry. They're also subjects of inquiry, in the sense that these traditions were produced by people of a scholarly bent. of a curious bent, who wrote a great deal of sort of argumentative and reflective material about things that we still care about today. Ibn Khaldun is sometimes talked about as the founder of sociology. It's a fascinatingly analytical and scholarly analysis of how history works and can stand toe to toe with any other grand theory of how human history has played out over thousands of years. That's going to be really fun. Moving into the second year in the next slide. I mean, Confucius, right? Yes, nothing to say there. Who is Mengzi, you may be wondering. Mengzi is often talked about as the second sage of Confucianism. You can see Confucius and Mengzi as a kind of 1-2 punch that might make you believe in humankind again and have hope for the future. I have a lot more to say, but I'll wait for the Q&A. Between them, Confucius and Mengzi basically will give you a very strong articulate sense of what Confucianism is, as a tradition of moral cultivation, a tradition of education, and a tradition of political action. And alongside Confucius and Mengzi, we're going to be reading a text that will simultaneously function as a historical or historiographical text and as one of the pinnacle works of Chinese fiction, because it's historical fiction. Three Kingdoms is one of these so-called 4 classical novels, because there's a short list of the 4 greatest novels of all time, according to the Chinese tradition itself. This one is about the collapse of empire. Which empire? For those with a basic program background, we could say the other Roman Empire, because the Han Empire is more or less simultaneous in its rise and fall with the Roman Empire. And Three Kingdoms is about the collapse of Han. Han to this day is still the self-designation of Chinese people. Three Kingdoms is simultaneously thrilling from the point of view of understanding what Chinese politics looked like in antiquity, and from the point of view we're going to be setting up in the seminar, where the characters in this novel all have a more or less Confucian education. They have certain Confucian background values. And when it comes time to make the tough calls in a situation of comprehensive crisis, what's going to happen to those values? In the next slide, rhetorical trail off. In the next slide, we return to Buddhism. But this is not quite the Buddhism of year 1. I was using expressions like early Buddhism or basic Buddhism. Sometimes because I'm more steeped in this kind of Buddhism, I refer to that earlier stuff as Buddhism 101 and this as Buddhism 201. Basically, to a greater degree than other traditions of religious thought and loyalty, Buddhism thematizes its own overcoming. This is a very complicated issue, but many of you will have encountered the expression Mahayana, or Great Vehicle Buddhism. This is the quarter where we shove our faces into that and try to understand what happens when Buddhists, loyal to the Buddha's word and operating with deeply Buddhist intuitions, systematically critique their own traditions and fundamental concepts as an expression of Buddhism. We're going to be looking at texts from all over the place. There's going to be Indian and Chinese and Japanese and other influences in how we wind up understanding Mahayana Buddhism in this quarter. And one thing that's going to strongly emphasize is that Buddhism, to some extent, always has been a highly international tradition that is deeply invested in spreading itself and translating itself and making itself meaningful to as many people as possible, which is part of how you get self-critique in the first place. How do we sell this is a great motivator for reinventing oneself. Alongside Mahayana Buddhism or international Buddhism, we're going to be looking at my personal favorite tradition, philosophical Daoism. You've probably heard of both of these texts, maybe not in this romanization scheme. Like, it usually looks like Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching using an older romanization scheme. This is like the current romanization scheme. Zhuangzi you may have encountered as Chuang Tzu. The point is, whether or not you've encountered them, the Laozi and the Zhuangzi represent one of the most profound, multifaceted, and aggressive and thought-provoking attacks ever mounted on everything that you care about. Everything that I care about. Hell, I'm practically part of this tradition and it undermines me every day. Buckle up. In the next slide, we round off this 2-year roller coaster, rooting ourselves in the Daoist and Buddhist and Confucian traditions, but also going in a more literary direction. The Lotus Sutra is so beautiful, I can't even explain it, so I'm not going to try. What happens when Zen philosophers like Dogen talk about reality? Likewise. Chinese poetry, meanwhile, and notice we haven't actually assigned a title to this, but we do have one in mind. There is a particular reading we're going to be using. Poetry is, I think, without a doubt, the chief literary art form of East Asian civilization. It always has been. And the theorists always treat lyrical expression of one's inner feelings as the essence of what writing is. And you're going to explore some of what the traditional critics think are the very, very best products of that. And alongside that, many of you will have heard of the Tale of Genji under headings like the first novel, sometimes the first psychological novel. The Tale of Genji is, I mean, where do I even begin? The Q&A looms, so I'm going to restrain myself. I think that the only thing on the next slide, if anything, is just the dates and times again. So this must be intended to like remind you that these are your practical options for going on the journey with us. And Kendall, is there anything else in the slide sequence that I have not yet gotten to?
Just more close looks at the beautiful curriculum that you guys have assembled. We can go back and look at it one by one. We can look at it a year at a time.
Given that I've far exceeded my 10-minute mandate, maybe we should let the Q&A decide which slide we go to next, or go back to next.
All righty, let's see here. I'm gonna let's see here. I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions that have come in on the chat, and then I'm gonna eliminate the screen share, although we can go back to it so that we can see people. Let's see here. We have 2 questions from Lutgart Calcott, who asks 2 questions about. She says, "Is the book Dream of the Red Chamber included?" And she also asks about the Epic of Gilgamesh.
We had a lot of conversations. And these are excellent questions, and I welcome them. The answer is going to be mainly, we had a lot of conversations about this. I'm going to address those 2 questions separately. And in fact, I'm going to address the Epic of Gilgamesh separately first. Asia is a big place. Asia has a lot of traditions. There's no Epic of Gilgamesh because we're not looking at the Akkadian or Sumerian traditions as part of that. And the reason, at least I don't know about the other people on the committee, but my reason for not including the Sumerian and Akkadian traditions is that they're dead. I mean, say what you will about their historical impact on traditions that are alive. We've chosen to try to do some justice to traditions that in this very day have tens, if not hundreds of millions of people who directly inherit them as part of their heritage. So that's why there's no Akkadian stuff. In terms of the Dream of the Red Chamber, we initially set out to dedicate 1 quarter's tutorial to a Chinese novel, specifically one of the classical Chinese novels. And the principal reason we settled on the 3 kingdoms as what to read was the availability of translations that were useful pedagogically, translations that were good, relatively contemporary, and or abridged. Because one fact about the classical Chinese novels is that they're prodigiously long. And assigning any of them in and of itself would involve making you buy like 5 books and having to select among 2,500 pages. We thought it would be more effective to take leading well-regarded translations that had abridged versions available, at least for this first outing. And when we compared those to each other, the one that we thought would integrate best into the curriculum as a whole was 3 Kingdoms, not least because it shows what happens when people try to be good. You know, it plays really well against the Confucian texts. I hope that's at least the beginning of a satisfying answer.
All right, and then we have Kenneth Silber. Kenneth, if you'd like to ask your question, you should be able to unmute yourself, and then you can ask it with your own voice. See, is that not working? I'll rescue you, my friend. Hang on a second. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Does that work?
It worked.
Very good.
So you mentioned the earlier Asian classics program that you had, and I am a proud and happy certificate holder from that program. And I'm glad that you're restarting a program. My question is, in looking at the six quarters, all of the ones from the second year and the first two quarters of the first year look like the same texts that were in the original program, along with some courses I've taken from Claire. And I'm wondering, you said it's going to be different. I'm unclear how it's going to be different.
As somebody who is not a veteran of teaching that prior program, I can't speak in a first personal way to how it's going to be different. What I can speak to is that it's fully integrated with the basic program pedagogy and the people who teach the basic program. Also, even though some of the titles are the same as they would have been in 2010 or whatever year we may be remembering, often we've updated the translations or used, variant texts, and we've recombined them with each other in a way that will yield different results. Because so much of what goes on in the basic program is, yeah, you could take any one of these texts in isolation, but you could also take it across from and in sequence with other texts. And every way that you sort of arrange and rearrange that yields different results. So, I mean, I would say that even though a lot of the texts are the same, the overall experience will be very idiosyncratic by design. Was there, I may have overlooked some question you asked. Does that basically cover it?
Well, maybe Claire, who was I think involved in some of those classes, could speak to some of the differences.
I'm sure. I liked what Stephen said. I think that represents a lot of what we have, what our deliberations were. We do need to put what we think are very foundational texts forward in this. So there will be a certain amount of overlap. We haven't simply overlapped we did a lot of work on the combination of texts and what played off of each other. We did a lot of work on how not to break it into cultures and parts of the world and move historically, but to give it a different kind of connection and life. And as someone who has spent most of my life going through many texts multiple times in different forms, it really is different every time. You get to new levels, you see new things. So this is not the old program, although it overlaps with a great number of the texts of the old program, not all of them. I don't think it's going to feel the same.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Kenneth. The next live question comes from Anson Tang. And Anson, are you able to, I clicked ask to unmute. There you go.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you folks for this presentation. This Asian Classics Tradition program sounds very, very interesting. I'm right now finishing up end of year 2 in the basic program. And I'm kind of wondering, like, I would love, after I finish the basic program to jump into this. What is the, how much flexibility, grace period are you guys giving this Asian Classics tradition to launch itself? If you think about, for example, launching a new Hollywood movie? Do you just let it run in is it considered a boutique film? You'll just let it run in selected theaters for like 2 weeks and then pull it? Or are you gonna let it, give it time to breathe? And then, like, I'm wondering, do I need to abandon the basic program to jump onto this now? Or can I be pretty safe and rest assured that in like 2-3 years time, this program will still be here and I'll be able to enroll in it? Like, you know, is there a short leash for how successful this program is considered to be established as one of the extensions?
I feel like that's a question for people who outrank me.
I was just going to say it might be useful to talk about the way we deal with the alumni sequences currently. So right now, this is going to be the 5th alumni sequence we have. We have 4 previous ones. And right now we are doing them in rotation. And so the way that works is there's always one sequence starting in the fall, and the second year of the previous sequence is running. And each year we start a new one, and there's a rotation. So they go in order. So the plan is to add this into the rotation. Currently, we are doing the first year of the Roman sequence right now, finishing up the first year of the Roman sequence. So next fall, we will be doing the first year of Asian classical traditions and the second year of the Roman sequence. And then the following year, it will be the first year of the modern tradition and the second year of the Asian classical traditions, and so on and so forth. If you want to see what the rotation is, I think they're in order on the alumni offerings webpage on our website. But that's the plan for now. One reason we do that rotation scheme is so that we have significant enrollment for these sequences. You know, we want to make sure that we have enough people to take them. So we're not offering them all at once because we don't have enough instructors or enough students to do all of those all at the time. So as I said, currently, oh, and Kendall put that you can email him for the rotation. So that's another place you can look. So that's the plan currently. And you know, there's always the possibility that that might change, but my guess is at least for the next few years, that's going to be the plan. So this one will come back around, as we say, in its place in the rotation.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Anson. Let's see. The next live voice question comes from Norm Boyer. Norm? Let's see there.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm also a graduate of the second year of the original program. So I first met Adam doing the Rig Veda and first met Claire doing Indian Buddhism. And it's been a long, wonderful time since then. I really enjoyed it. I expect to be back. The one thing I really get to pick up is the Three Kingdoms, because that wasn't in the rotation my year. Most of the West I've read, but it's the conversation. I mean, I'm doing second and third times in basic programs, and it's always a different conversation. And that's an exciting part of it. And these are wonderful, amazing texts. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Norm. I quoted you there on the chat there. The next question comes from Laura Visecki. Laura?
And this is probably a question for Zoe, but sometimes for the sequences, when I've looked at them to register, the instructors are not listed. Will we know when we go to register who the instructors are going to be for both sections?
Yes, we should. Sometimes the reason they're not listed right away is because we list things before we have the schedule made, especially for the 4-year program and for the alumni sequences. Sometimes we do have last minute changes that result in changes to the instructors. We try to know that stuff as far in advance as possible, but it's not always possible. So again, we will try to have those instructors listed as soon as we feasibly can. So you'll know who's teaching what.
Thanks, Laura. That's a good thing, to know. So we're putting the courses up live, or at least autumn courses will be available for registration in about a week and a day. We should know by then who will be teaching in the autumn quarter at least. Thank you, Laura. The next question comes from Catherine Johnson. Catherine?
Are you committed to having online option through the whole thing?
Yes.
Thank you. Because I'm not resident in Chicago now, so thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. The next live question comes from Steve Matson. Steve?
Hi there. Very practical question for somebody who works full-time professionally. Can we anticipate the reading load from week to week will be consistent with other basic program curriculum?
Complicating point. The basic program itself is radically inconsistent in terms of how many pages you're expected to read. So the range is going to be from like 10 to 100.
Yeah, that's cool, but I don't want to read 500 a week.
No, we wouldn't ask you to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, so, in developing this as a committee, we've been guided by our own experience of good taste as basic program instructors, and nothing struck us as outrageously out of taste in terms of the page counts that we assigned.
Great.
And also, I might add that in the curriculum, if we were to display it again, there's always either the seminar or the tutorial for each quarter that is rather more given to a heavier page load. So, for example, in the autumn tutorial of year one, the tutorial is, the autumn quarter, the tutorial is the Mahabharata, and that will be the one where you read very many pages per week. The seminar begins with like the Rig Veda and then goes on to the Upanishads. And both of those are the kinds of reading where, there's, there'll be very many fewer pages. Claire?
I was just going to say, it's important to know that, of course, we are not reading the whole Mahabharata, which is 10 vast volumes and couldn't be done. We wouldn't do that to anybody, and I don't think it's humanly possible. We are using a respected retelling, and the page count of that is very within a readable limit.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Steve. So we've got another live voice question, and then I'm going to go to the chat for a little bit, but I'll still be watching for live voices. So this next question comes from Jay Tremblay. Jay?
Good evening. Thanks for the call tonight. A couple of purely mechanical kinds of questions. One is, are costs going to be similar to what you've seen per class costs, similar to what you've seen in the basic program and the alumni? Secondly, what enrollment limits might there be per class section, excuse me? And then thirdly, in terms of the readings, are you looking at print new, print used, and or digital availability?
I'll answer the first two questions. Is everything's the same?
Thank you.
So, so radical continuity from the rest of your experiences of basic program, four-year courses, alumni sequences. And then for the more to the point about the individual texts that we're lining up, I'll turn things over to Stephen and Claire.
So part of our lengthy conversations in figuring out what texts to use was availability. And we were looking at availability of print texts. So one thing we can guarantee is that these things will be available by print. A lot of them also have ebook versions that can be purchased, but we didn't prioritize tracking those down or figuring out what the costs were. Some of them are purely in PDF form, though not many of them. Do you want to add anything, Claire?
No, that really covers it. The little bit that's in PDF is a small fraction. But yeah, it was important to prioritize things that were still in print and readily available.
And also, it's just happy that the last 10 to 15 years have seen lots of new, relatively lots of newer translations of these works than were available 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, availability will not be an issue. Thank you for your question. And now I'm going to rotate. So Anson, I see you there, but I promised I would go to the typewritten questions, but I'll come back to you, sir. So let's see here. I'm scrolling all the way up, and I believe that the first question I've yet to read aloud comes from Cynthia Shilsky, who asks, Cynthia asks, is access to the texts going to be difficult? And no, access should be quite ready. And also, as always, books will be ordered at the bookstore, so that if you order online, you can be guaranteed that you'll get the correct edition. The next question from Stephen.
I want to say one thing. Access is open to interpretation. Cynthia, did you mean like commercial access, or did you mean like mental access to the world of the texts?
And then, accessibility is like an entirely other meaning of access.
Right.
So Cynthia, I'll be watching the chat if you want to type in a follow-up to your question. Then Pat Oakleaf asks, will there be just as much emphasis on the Socratic approach? Many of us value this.
The intention is certainly that, while we will be giving a little bit more background and context than we currently typically do in the basic program, it is close reading and discussion. And that will be the focus. So Stephen, you want to add something to that?
No, that's pretty much it. It's a basic program experience.
Yeah.
Radical continuity from your previous experience. Mm-hmm. Thanks for your question, Pat. The next question comes from Hadassah Rosen, who asks, I am currently enrolled in Romans. I will have to wait until the next cycle, but this looks amazing. How well versed will our instructors be in the material? Stephen.
At which point I want to say, how well versed are they in any of the material they teach is an open question a lot of the time. So one thing that makes it a basic program experience is that the instructors, a lot of them do have a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise in these texts, but what we really prioritize is how more than what. We prioritize methods, and we prioritize ways of engaging texts that are compatible with all kinds of different levels of prior experience. In terms of the Asian classics specifically, I'll just say that, there's a range of advanced experience with these texts, and that will presumably not be particularly visible in the result because, yeah, Claire.
Oh, I was just going to add that we have been discussing this for a couple of years now, that, although our instructors have a lot of expertise in a lot of texts, and some of them do have expertise in these texts, we really want more instructors to come in and develop it. And we have been giving talks and having discussions in basic program staff meetings now for quite a long time on these texts. We have planned to have some instructor support available for instructors who feel that they don't know them as well as others. So this is something that's on our mind, and we're committed to a good experience.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Hadassah, for your question. And the next question in the chat comes from Nancy Kelly Martin, who asks, exciting initiative. Can you describe or discuss the Chinese poetic tradition, (S), close parenthesis, you have identified?
Yeah, talk about an embarrassment of riches. The book we're going to be using, and I should probably put this in the chat, is called Poems of the Masters, translated by a guy whose nom de plume is Red Pine, the name of a Chinese immortal. Poems of the Masters is an anthology of lyrical verse from the Tang and Song periods. Many of you may not know what to associate with the Tang and Song periods, but anybody who knows the history of Chinese literature knows to associate the Tang poetry with the Tang period with the pinnacle of poetic composition. Many of the most famous sort of lyricists, you might say, in Chinese history lived in the Tang period. So it's going to be them. Some of the names you might have heard of include Li Bai or Li Bo and Du Fu. And for those who appreciate, cross-civilizational comparisons of merit, people call Du Fu the Chinese Shakespeare all the time. So It's going to be Tong and Song verse.
Thanks, Stephen, and thank you for your question, Nancy. The next question comes from Kim Borgmeyer, who asks, looking at the site for basic program alumni offerings, ... Can someone who has completed 2 years of the basic program enroll in this sequence? I got this one, guys. Yes, because you have alumni status when you finish the second year of the basic program. The next question is from Mary Lou Lager, who asks, who declares finishing third year of basic will be on board for in-person in the fall quarter. Oh, great. In person Wednesday morning. I'll see you there. And then there are, let's see, okay, that one. Then
Wait a minute, just a quick note on that. It's starting in the fall quarter of 2024. Next year, it will be the second year of it. So fall quarter of 2025 will be second year, but it will come around again.
Oh, good. Yes, Claire, good to notice. Yes. Yeah, I think of the academic year as 25, right? So it's because I have a pointed head. Sorry about the ambiguity. Let's see. Lydia Lee asks, I missed out on part of the meeting. Do students have to be part of the basic program to enroll in this? Thank you. Students need to be, as I was just saying, alumni of the basic program, which is 2 years of the 4-year curriculum. And then, Anson, I said I wouldn't forget you. How could I forget you? Back to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So a practical question. A number of people work during the daytime, like myself. Will there be always kind of guaranteed an evening time slot for this Asian classic sequence?
The long story short is if the enrollments for the Wednesday night section hold, and I think they will. So if everybody who signs up for who is working during the standard business workday signs up for the Wednesday night section, then the Wednesday night section will, as it were, stay in business for the full 2 years.
And Kendall, isn't it normal strategy to try to schedule both a morning and an evening class for each of the alumni sequences?
Yeah, well, but yeah, so we have two morning classes. One of them is in person, and one evening class. It's only online.
No, I was thinking forward to the future in future iterations for those who are looking down the road. There's generally a morning.
Generally, yes, indeed. Good question.
Thanks.
And okay, so yeah, any more questions? I can put the curriculum back up if you want to browse it again. It's pretty good looking.
Do it.
We're coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. There's nothing in any scripture.
Pretty proud of that curriculum.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. It's a good one. Let's see. Dennis Frank has just posted. I'm eternally grateful, Claire and Stephen and the BP committee for developing this very exciting new 2-year sequence. I'm in person. Well, great, Dennis. All right. See you on Wednesday mornings. That's very good to hear. So yeah, I suppose given the way I was raised, now is the time for the invitation song. Oh, Keith Cantrell. And let's see, you are still muted, my friend.
I just want to know for all people who wanted to be on this call and weren't able to be, is this being recorded so that they can see the curriculum as well? We were recording this, right?
Yes, very good question. Yes.
So are you going to send out an email with a link, or how will they be able to find this?
We're going to try to put it on the alumni offerings page on our website.
Okay.
The curriculum is listed on there already. There's like a bunch of tabs at the bottom, and the curriculum is on those tabs. I'll put that link in the chat in just a sec.
Okay, thanks, Zoe.
And let's see, Ensign.
Hi, sorry, another question. I'm just thinking out loud. I guess the general, as mentioned, I'm now finishing up second year of the basic program. I guess the general recommendation is to finish the complete basic program first before doing a sequence? Is that the general recommendation, instead of like doing a sequence, interrupting your basic program, then going back to finish it off later?
Well, that's a definite fork in the road for you, because it depends on what your own priorities are, because rather many people prioritize staying with their cohort. So, if that's your priority, then you would want to just continue on with your cohort from year 2 to year 3. However, if your priority is to take Asian classical traditions, and you're finishing up second year, then by all means, you can step right into it. And then, you can come back for year 3 and year 4 of the 4-year curriculum. We keep records. And so you would still, get your 4-year certificate. So once you have finished your second year, it's sort of like achieving free agency in sports. Then you can really, you can visit whatever flowers, you desire. Let's see here. All right. And let's see here. Some more came up. Pat Oakleaf asks, who will be the instructors? We talked about this a little bit before. I have a really pretty good idea about the autumn quarter of year 1. So I'll be teaching the seminar, and Claire will be teaching the tutorial. I haven't run exactly that entire schedule for all 3 sections by Claire. But Claire, by the way, I'll be emailing you about that in the next few days. So that, for the fall. We also, based on, staff meetings, I just don't have this data at the, what do we say now? Top of mind. But there are some of the seminars and some of the tutorials over the course of the 2 years are, as it were, spoken for by certain members of the staff. So we have known knowns, we have known unknowns, and we may even have some unknown knowns, but we also have some known unknowns. But for the autumn, Pat, that's who it looks like is going to be teaching it. And then let's see here. After Pat, there's Zoe, and then Norman Waite says it might help to list the rotation periods for each of those sequences on the alumni offerings page alongside their descriptions. And then he says, is it possible, or did I miss it somewhere? No. It's a dodge, because we don't want to commit ourselves to a rotation, 3 or 4 years down the line. And so that's why you'll never actually see the rotation published. For example, the rotation, if we'd published it 4 years ago, would not have known about Asian classical traditions. And then Zoe says, we're in the middle of a redesign. Okay, I guess that'll come up in a meeting. Cynthia would like to see the sections again. Yes, I can put that up. And then Karen Kunze asked, any thoughts on taking the Asian alumni sequence while taking the basic program? Well, I happen to know that Karen is finishing the second year. So Karen, you are welcome to take 2 or even 3 courses from Graham at a time. It's done. It is done. So let me share the schedule again. Okay, the screen share, come on. Oh, Zoe's typing the schedule into chat. But I can do it this way as well. Boom, boom, boom. There we are. There you go, Cynthia. So in the left-hand column, that's the official course code. That's the rigmarole that we need to make a registration happen. But you'll notice that A1 means autumn section 1 at the end of that secret code. The middle column tells you the day of the week and the time of day. The right-hand column, the mode of delivery, whether it's online or in person. I'm going to linger on this for just a few more seconds, but I'm about to stop the screen share because we are, oh no, we still do have some more minutes here, but I am going to stop the screen share. Yeah. And Zoe says the courses will be available for registration on the website in approximately a week and a day. So next Tuesday. And I can plug, I'm teaching in September a 3-week course that's kind of a prequel, and it's called, and perhaps I could have given it a catchier name, The Indo-Iranians in Herodotus, because I think that people don't understand that Herodotus, well, also parts of Herodotus that we don't read in the core, where we meet we meet some folks. So the Persians, the Thracians, the Scythians, and the Scythians are Iranians. Yeah, so take that course in September before Asian Classics starts, Asian Classical Traditions. Yeah, so any more questions? I'm looking both at live faces and at the chat. Well, okay. If it hard for me to believe, for this crowd has run out of questions. I knew they hadn't. Bill? You are still muted though, Bill.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm very glad to see this happening. I've been one of the people who really wanted to see this, and I'm familiar with both of you. And if you're the ones teaching my section when I sign up, that'd be great. But anyway, I really am thinking this is going to be a great experience.
Thank you, Bill. I agree. So I'll just say in closing, and maybe we'll end a little bit early, that as the chair of the instructional staff, I parachuted into quite a few of their curriculum meetings. And that's how I can assure you that the level of reading is humane. I know the amount of time and focus and attention that they put as a group into every decision. It's really a well-designed 6-quarter cycle, yeah, I'm really proud of their work product, and I think that it's really going to live in the classroom in a very coherent and memorable manner. And Karan says, looks amazing. Thanks for creating this program. And I think that's a fine way to end our information session because Stephen and Claire, as well as 2 other members of the committee who are not here with us tonight, Cindy Rutz and Aaron Tugendhaft, thank you guys very much for all of the work you've done. And I think it's going to be a great 2 years. I agree with all of our students who have said that. All righty then. Let's see. What if I take away the spotlights? Well, I think, I don't know how to make everyone appear, but let's see, at 6:58. So why don't we call it a night? And then when I press end, this recording is going to go into the atmosphere, and it should show up on our website in probably a week to a week and a half. So you can tell your friends. And thank you all very much for coming. So farewell. Bye-bye.